Okay, so can you see me now? Has that one started? Well, it says live on this. Yeah. Hooray! All right. Sorry about that, everyone. Yeah, Kate, if you wouldn't mind keeping eye on both chats so that if people show up to the first one, because like I won't have time to obviously update the blog while we're in the middle of in the middle of the discussion, and maybe drop it on the Twitters as well, because people know you're our chat wrangler and you're doing a fine job given the technical difficulties we've just had. Cool. So that's a really good way of, funnily enough, as we were getting to the end of a cycle, we're on the next cycle video. That's what's happening. So that's it for January. Like the big deal for January is the Saturn Eclipse business, which is a foreshadowing of the kind of like transitional story that will take us through.
Yeah. And I wanted to say, so some of the things we're talking about are personal in that they are collective and they intersect with our personal lives, but on a more explicitly personal level, the South Node with Saturn. And, you know, what eclipses do is that they make the usually latent or in the shadows action of the nodes visible. They bring what is shadowy into visibility, just as that's what an eclipse is, you know, physically. And so the South Node tends to drain or purify or purge the planets it touches. And so, you know, purgation is interesting. It's a contradictory process because it's a process of cleaning that involves lots of what's dirty, right? You know, if you take a purgative, you make a big mess with your body, but then the mess is no longer in your body. And so we can see this as giving Saturn a purgative, right? And so this means, this will mean for a lot of people dealing, like really reviewing, going through and reviewing more than intellectually, but also emotionally, going through questions of control and control both of others, the environment, as well as oneself. Like what control is actually poison? Like what is the proper amount of control? What does control look like? Are we using somebody else? Are we using somebody else's idea of what is structured, mature, controlled in a positive way? You know, our ideas, most ideas of control are tainted to the point that control itself kind of has a, if I say that someone is controlling, that will never be a compliment, even though the capacity to control different elements in one's life is crucial for sanity and functionality, right? And so the South Node over Saturn is, you know, it's that sort of, it's trying to clean up. It'll look like cleaning up control and dealing with being controlled as well. Like, what do you take orders from in that area of your life? Right. So if it's first house, then it's you. If it's second house, it's money. You know, if it's the fourth, it's, you know, do you let your mom tell you what to do too much? Do you tell people what to do just like your mom did and you hated it and you didn't realize you were doing the same thing?
So this is because we use you in particular, right? I've learned it from you and I like. We talk about planets having or being medicine. Mm-hmm. So you get a double dose, like a purgative level dose of whatever your sat cap medicine is for you from a control basis. Like, and it's not even something you can intellectualize through. It's like you're going to get that dose. Like that's what happens.
Well, and I would say that, right. So if the Saturn, Saturn in Capricorn is, it's for getting shit together, getting on schedule, not just in I'm going to get done when I need to get done next week, this week, but what is my plan? Where do I want to be by the end of Saturn's time in Capricorn so that I can have earned my reward if I didn't, you know, if you hadn't already earned it coming in. And so I would say, you know, this is actually the South Node or K2 is sort of asking us to, it's a meta operation on the medicine itself. It's cleaning that. It's I think of the alchemical process of distillation and then redistilling and redistilling and redistilling. So you have there's less noise in that discipline groundedness medicine. There's less of like your dad yelling at you, and there's more of like, no, this is a clean and virtuous and useful thing with a minimum of other crap stuck in it.
So that okay, that's the first big thing in H1 2019. Is that the biggest thing in H1 2019?
Oh, in the first half. Well, that's an important current that runs throughout the entire year.
Okay.
And it will be most emphasized during January and July, but it'll be emphasized whenever the moon moves through Capricorn or Cancer.
Gotcha.
Which, so, at least that's what, 5 days a month? It's a lot of that.
Right.
And so we have that, and then this, so much more is possible. Jupiter in Sagittarius, this like reclamation of the magical heroic, or the heroic magical, that you can make things happen and achieve things that don't seem sensible.
So potentially a useful way on a personal level of thinking about it is you're going to get the like tie your fucking shoelaces Saturn lesson, which is going to be important for you to be able to maximize the Jupiter Sag opportunity. So like it is a way of kind of going, because it sounds like it's going to be a repeated refrain from January. So we get it with the eclipses, and then each time the moon pings this particular thing, and then again in July. So the message of like tie your shoelaces, iron your shirt, brush your hair kind of thing is going to keep coming up. But the way to lean into that is to go, well, this is how I'm going to straighten up to maximize the Jupiter Sag opportunities. When you start getting those, oh, that was a bit too much purgative medicine.
Yeah, that's the opposite of the way that I was thinking about it, but that totally works.
Okay.
I was thinking about it. One of the images that was coming together for me was, we've got this Jupiterian. So, one of the things, whenever we're dealing with benefics versus malefics, in this case, Jupiter versus Saturn, benefics tend to be things that we have the option to do, whereas malefics tend to be shit that we have to deal with.
Gotcha.
And both are important, right? And so I was thinking about how to position the heroic Jupiter and Sag narrative in the midst of the haunted Saturn
Gotcha.
Saturn cap. And so it's sort of like having the Tolkien quest in the middle of, sort of, if you could somehow put Tolkien on top of The Walking Dead. And it occurred to me that there is a video game series that kind of does that, which is the Fallout series, which is basically super fun role-playing game quest in the post-nuclear Fallout wasteland. And that game, I think they're coming out with their first virtual reality version of that. And I was like, that's actually very Jupiter Sag, heroic wanderer in the post-apocalyptic wasteland.
Yeah. That's cool. I like that.
But yeah, it's like the heroes of the apocalypse.
So what else have we got for H1? Do we want to talk about Uranus? Anything before
well
that?
There's okay, and so there we have so we get January 5th, we get the solar in Capricorn.
Yep.
And then January 20th, we get the very last eclipse in the Aquarius Leo axis. And so it's at 1 degree, it's in the very first degree of Leo. So it's just barely out of Cancer. And that wraps the eclipse cycle that we've been in for almost 2 years.
Right. So that will be whatever happened, depending on where it is in your chart. Like end of January, that eclipse is a finishing up of whatever you've been hopefully processing through the last
or whatever the Leo Aquarius eclipses have been doing to you.
Yeah.
And whatever you've been doing with that, like that's the last installment, no more. And then when we get to July, it's just going to be Cancer Capricorn.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's important because again, what's interesting in the way that these interlace, which is the way that events often interlace in life, is you get the beginning of a new right before the end of the old. It's not end, wait, new. It's new and in between, and then end, and then to the new. So there's that. I think Uranus is probably next.
That's yeah.
Okay, so Uranus ingressed into Taurus last May, and and it'll be there for, you know, basically until 2025. But it had a little bit of a regress. It popped back into Aries in November, and it'll be back in Aries until I think it's March 6th of 2019, and then it's in Taurus until 2025.
And what is Uranus in Aries? Like, what have we just started?
Well, so Uranus in Aries was basically 2011 to 2010 to 2017.
Right.
It was Arab Spring. It was Uranus in Aries. So, you know, Uranus is this disruptive, rebellious, creative, sometimes empowering, sometimes shattering sort of type of power. And in Aries, it was very direct. Like it wasn't the principle of rebellion. There were tons of rebellions, right?
Right.
For a few years, there was a rebellion or massive protest movement in every, and you're like, oh, now it's in Thailand, now it's in Ukraine, now it's in Bolivia, now it's, there. And so that's been Uranus in Aries, right?
And November is when the yellow vest stuff started in France.
Okay. Yep. There you go.
And that is continuing and growing, and we may assume so that's like the story of Uranus in Aries is a specific way of insurrection. Like it's actual people in the streets. Right.
When loud, right? Yeah. Whereas Uranus and Taurus, which we only got about 6 months of, is something different. It seems more, at this point, being able to look back at a little bit, it seems changing the material basis of things, rather than, so with fire signs in general, if we're going to have conflict or insurrection, there's a conflict of wills, and there's the straightforward expression of things. With fire, with earth, it's more like changing the ground upon which the conflict takes place. Does that make sense? Yep. Or like you're doing here, changing your material situation in a way that, as we say, is a rebellion against the archonically prescribed method of living, but it's changing the ground, right?
So it's a new theater of insurrection. That's good, because I'm sure resonating with a lot of people, the sentiment behind insurrection is certainly shared. It's just that a Uranus in Aries approach is no longer going to work.
Yeah, well, it
got traction. Yeah.
Well, it did. It's Aries. Like, things in Aries are powerful and direct, but when when a more subtle strategy is called for, or when a conflict, how should we say, gets to a point where direct action isn't the strategy that works, then you have to kind of leave the giant Aries hammer back in the tool shed.
No, cool. I like that. I'm gonna ruminate on that some more. I'm sure that'll show up in the newsletter, because what I'm looking for is space weather inspiration for how we deal with living at this point in the timeline. And I think in the story of Uranus, Austin, that is where I find my answers. So what else have we got in H1?
Well, so there's that, and that's actually the Uranus moves back into Taurus pretty much within the same day as Mercury's first retrograde starts.
Okay.
So we're looking at March 5th through 28th, depending on time zone, right? For Mercury retrograde, and that's a Mercury retrograde in Pisces. It should be similar to the one we're almost done with now, in the sense that Mercury has the hardest time in Sagittarius and Pisces, and so that's a Mercury retrograde in the sign where it has the hardest time, and Neptune's there. So just in terms of not like in terms of like retrograde flack, or the machines like the machines shorting out because they've been too moistened, like that's there's lots of that,
right?
It's sort of it's not a great time to to plan on not getting lost.
Right. Okay. It's certainly been the case for us running the event, and just general travel hiccups that you've had, and life. This has been one doozy of a Mercury retrograde, including, I guess, these video challenges. So I will be glad to see the back of this one. Usually it's kind of like seasonal influenza. Like some Mercury retrogrades are like, no, I was a bit sick. This one was, you should be in bed for a few days.
Yeah, well, what's funny about this one and the one that occurs in March is that both of them are in Jupiter-ruled signs with Jupiter in a really strong position. And so there's been a lot of all's well that ends well. Like nothing important has gotten ruined by this, in my life or in anybody's life that I'm aware of. It just took 3 times as long to get to the happy ending. And so the one in in March has a similar quality. It's Jupiter ruled, it's configured to Jupiter, et cetera, et cetera.
Gotcha. So anything else from H1, or should we start, moving on to talking about the event and space magic and so on? What else do people need to know about H1? Okay,
so just one thing that actually leads into discussion of so below stuff is so in April both Jupiter and Saturn turn retrograde, and so basically both that, like distilling that, if you want to distill that Saturn medicine, it's going to be better during the first quarter. Gotcha. If you're gonna do the fun Jupiter magic, it's going to be better the first quarter. There'll be time where they go direct later in the year, but you're looking at 4 months of retrogradation, and Jupiter and Saturn don't change nearly as radically as say Venus does. When Venus goes retrograde, it's very different. But like Jupiter's not as good. Saturn, if you're looking for positive Saturn virtue stuff, it's not as good when it's retrograde. So if you've got sigils to launch or talismans to craft, remember that even though they'll be in the signs where they have essential dignity, they're going to be retrograde from April to August.
Right. So just off the top, if you were born with one of them retrograde, would that be, if you were going to do the talisman stuff, it would be like, nah, I'm going to risk it. But everyone else should be like, find your Q1 elections, so that one and get them.
So it's really interesting with Mercury, Venus, and Mars. I find that if a person is born, during the retrograde phase of Mars, and that they have a very different experience of Mars retro. Same with Mercury, same with Venus. That doesn't seem to apply with Jupiter, Saturn, Uranus on out. Their cycles are so much longer that the rules are just kind of different with them. And a Jupiter. So, and just as an example, with Jupiter retrograde, it doesn't become malefic. It's not like, oh, Jupiter's normally this, this really friendly, fuzzy planet, but then when it's retrograde, it means the opposite of that. It means that rewards or gains, the things that you want to bring in or want to move towards, take longer and more steps to get to you.
Gotcha.
It's like a more winding way.
The king's throne room is like an extra 5 floors up the tower.
Yeah. That's a good way to put it. And then with Saturn's angrier when it's retrograde.
Right.
Well,
who isn't? Yeah.
It's true.
Yeah.
Well, actually, there's I forget who it was, but one of the classic Hellenistic texts actually says that every planet, when it is retrograde, takes on the nature of Mars.
Oh, I like that.
It just gets a little angrier.
Yeah, that's cool. All right, so anything else? That's quite good for H1. Like, everyone needs to work out what the eclipses are going to be for them, and just be aware of Uranus going from Aries back into Taurus as a kind of macro thing. And if you want stuff from the big guys, be organized and find your elections preferably in Q1, or otherwise wait to the end of the year.
Yep. And then one final thing, just to kind of frame this, is June, July are a little bit of a shit show. So July, which is beyond our H1 here, that's when the next set of eclipses comes. But right before that in June, especially mid-June, we have Mars has moved into Cancer by then, and Mars is on the north node, while Saturn's on the south node, and Pluto's right there, and Mercury is in Cancer too. So we have basically a pretty ugly malefic stare down during the middle of June, which is basically exactly the same flavor of malefic we'll get in July with the eclipses. But it's like, it's a little, from a practical point of view, that's not the time period where you want to be setting things up. That's where you want to have already gotten things running. And, you know, you might batten down the hatches a little bit, but if you already have something put together and moving, it can get through that, where it's very difficult to put some, you know, to create something or start something at a time where there's a lot of impediments.
Yeah.
And so I would, I mean, just kind of get it going, get it all figured out by March is a very good idea. There's some nice April stuff, but yeah, sooner rather than later, because June, July is not
Is it
great.
batten down the hatches time?
Yeah, it's not great.
Okay, yeah, cool. That's good. Well, that's winter down here, so I don't have to ruin my summer. I'm just gonna stay down here. Right. So speaking of being down here, so below, yeah, I mean, I had the benefit. I mean, it was a bit challenging. Thank you, Mercury, of cutting the video together. So we were talking before we hit record about I've had more of an opportunity to process it because I had to watch it through and cut it together. And I think we did. I mean, I have to thank you and Kate and, you know, everyone who helped. I know some of them are in the chat room for it. I think we did. I think it was a really, really good coming together of people, and it felt like a new and good thing. But because it's us, and even though we had several hours, we accomplished 60% of the talk that we wanted to accomplish. And so there's some stuff that we've subsequently got, it would have been good to talk about this.
I would say we accomplished 95% of the work, but 60% of the talk.
Yeah, exactly. And we all wanted drinks by the time that, you know, you and I would have kept them going until 2 a.m. But we were all ready for drinks at that particular point.
Drinks were had.
Yeah, one of the things, because I want to talk a couple of stuff. Do we want to start with talismans, or do we want to start with
wherever you want?
So, one of the things that we didn't quite get to, and it's probably a bit more of a premium member thing, for the last year and a half or so, we've been working out how you can have animism as an epistemology, because in metaphysics you have ontology, and that's fine. We already have that for animism, like things that are alive have a life, right? Done. But the epistemology is how, you know, you validate truth. And what fascinates me about to kind of shrink down to one sentence what I heard and what I said in terms of talisman best practice is, if you're going to do talismans, it's sort of the Solomonic best practice. If you're going to do talismans, do them as written, or otherwise do something else with a sufficient understanding of the language of what's going on. Don't swap out stuff because it's a little bit too hard. Like, I can't be bothered doing gold, I'll use paper. Do something completely different with the use of magical or astrological timing, being that it's the same thing. So what I wanted to get to is, like, why? Because that seems like a valid statement to make. There's a lot of stuff you can do with astrological timing when it comes to magic. Don't call it a talisman unless it is. And also, if you're going to kind of mix up the ingredients, dare I say, because of laziness, and then it doesn't work, you have to own, like, well, I actually didn't do it as described, so if it didn't work, that's on me, rather than like, oh, why can't I get this to work? And I wanted to, like, one of the things that, say, Eduardo Viveras de Castro talks about with perspectivism, and he's a Brazilian anthropologist, and this idea, which he freely admits is an academic artifact, he created it based on studying Amazonian peoples for decades, right? And in the Amazon, what he calls it is perspectivism. And we found, I was brush cutting earlier today, and I showed Austin the latest snake habitat, a new one, not the one underneath the guest house. And I use that as the example. So in perspectivism, the snake that lives in the hole just across the road sees that hole as a house, as a human house. We see it as a snake hole because snakes, every organism or thing essentially has person vision, right? And what that means is what a person is. And Anaconda will see its hole on the side of the Amazon as a house, but it won't see human houses as a house. And so the question becomes, and I do this as a kind of intellectual exercise to see if we can get Arabic and Western ideas to be interoperable with the rest of the sort of systems of magic available on the planet. And I guess, Michael, one of the things I wanted to talk about is, what does a solar spirit see when it looks at gold? Because a human sees gold. And if we if it sees it as itself, or if it sees it as a house, that's a way of thinking about why you have to use gold, because a solar spirit is going to see paper as something different. And there's a really interesting way of sliding this epistemology underneath talismanic and technical hermetica best practice that allows it to work with other systems of magic around, not work with, but look the same as, in a good way, other systems of magic around the world, where the materia are used because these are the materia that certain spirits require. And the bridge for that, to me, and this came up in a premium members course, is like in dynastic Egypt, you would have the statues that were in the temples paraded around the city, right, on certain holy days, except they'd be covered so that the profane could not see the statue of Amun-Ra or whoever it happened to be. Now, think about that from a perspectivist angle. Is that because profane eyes looking at it will turn it into a statue, whereas priestly or initiated eyes looking at it will see the god? And so, not that the Egyptians were running on perspectivism. It's not that at all. It's about sliding modern tools into our analysis of magic and history to get the pieces to work together, because they all work, and the system isn't really good at... We don't have a really good way of thinking with it that allows us to experiment and move it forward. And so what I wanted to get to was maybe it's worth looking at the correct use of materia in talisman creation from a perspectivist angle, because you don't know what a solar spirit sees when it looks at gold. Does it see the same thing? And I've been ruminating on that in the lead up to the event and afterwards, but I just thought I'd describe it here. Austin hasn't heard this before. You'd think this, I mean, it does sound like drunken talk, but this isn't a drunken talk we've had yet. And I did want to spring it on him because I'm very interested to see what his first impressions of whether that mode of thinking with might be useful in the medium term. Over to you.
I actually don't have that much to say, because that's right. Like, that seems basically correct. That seems just correct, and it fits with everything that I've done, as well as my thoughts about what I have done. And it reminds me of, there's a point in So Below where Avalon said, well, do we have to anthropomorphize planets? And we were talking about it, and what I said was, they seem to like it a lot. And more importantly, to a certain degree, anthropomorphizing is a way of assuming that there's a personhood and then interacting with like it's personhood. And so if you framed the construction of the body of a talisman as making something that looks and feels like home to the celestial spirit that you're working with, that's exactly what you're doing. Yeah. And I like that, because there is both a structural component to that. Like a home needs to be sturdy enough to contain, and there are certain structural principles there, but it also, like, creating a home is not merely objective science. There is, like, if you were to create the perfect home for someone, you would take their taste into account, but you would use your own aesthetic and poetic capacity to, just hit the right note for them using what you have. Yeah. And that's exactly right. Making a it's like how should we say, make it like writing the most meaningful letter to a sweetheart, or creating the birthday card that is going to hit him right in the heart. And that's a reaching out to that entity, but reaching out as you. Yeah. And that's how I feel like that starts to happen anyway, when you've really planned out a project, when you're going to work, and you're thinking about not just materials, but designs, and your thoughts start funneling towards this as yet unrealized perfection. And And then synchronistic things start happening where you walk by a store you've walked by 100 times and you see something in the window that goes perfectly in this, in this talisman or spell project, and somebody, points something out to you on Facebook or whatever. Then like that.
And that's exactly what if we get a satisfactory language to think with and describe these things, this is what I mean by do talismans as directed, essentially, and call them a talisman. But once you understand that language, the universe will respond. And once you know, so for instance, going back to solar and gold, the implications of that, and I get why Avalon said anthropomorphize. If I jumped in there, I would have said no, because what she was saying is, do we have to treat them like humans? No, but we do have to acknowledge their personhood, which is different to anthropomorphization. But going back to what does a solar spirit see when it sees gold, the horizontal implications of that are, what does a solar spirit see when it views all gold on the planet? Like, and that's when the sort of vertical of astrology becomes the horizontal of technical hermetica, which is, and that is a match to a lot of the animist kind of cosmologies that we have in the premium members area kind of observed or deep dove on over the last couple of years, because all of a sudden you're starting to see the actual language of creation, like language of the birds, dare I say, because once you can do that, then you're in the position of going beyond or doing something other than talismans, because of how you get talismans right, that has implications for how you want to try other things with celestial spirits and timing and so on. And that's where I think we're at.
That's what the Picatrix says. The guy over and over, our unknown author, over and over again says, if you understand how to do this, then you understood 1,000 other things. If you can do this right, you understand how creation works and how spirit inhabits creation. So just to back up half a second, I'm really interested now in thinking through each planet, what looks like a home, what looks like food, what looks like my body, and what looks like self, which is not always the same as body.
Yep.
Right.
This is perspectivism. The Jaguar sees
and those are relatively universal questions as far as if there is an entity with personhood. Almost every creature has those categories.
Yes. And again, it's an academic artifact, but what De Castro does is present that as an epistemological tool for cultural analysis and cross-cultural analysis. So another Jaguar example, which speaks to directly what you're saying, is with the Runa Puma. If you're in the Amazon and you see a Jaguar and it's looking at you, you maintain your eye contact, because when it's looking at you, you are a human. It sees you as a person. If you look away, it sees you as meat. You become meat to the Jaguar person, and that's the personhood and sight lines and how we see things. And it seems to me that what planets or planetary spirits or whatever we're calling them, right? What they see as themselves, what they see as home, what they see as food, what they like and don't like. This is literally the language of animism.
Yes, 100. Yeah, this is perfect. So one more category, child.
Sure.
Right, so one of the more hilarious things in the Picatrix, although the Picatrix is pretty hilarious. But
insufficient
one of the things
dick jokes, but
that
other
has
than
been
that,
often discussed by me and other people is during the planetary petitions, where you're basically going for something closer to a Solomonic evocation than anything else in the Picatrix, where you're just, it's a big favor. Is you're supposed to dress like someone that planet likes, which is a way of saying like dress like their kid, right? For Saturn, you wear the dark robes. For Mercury, you have a notebook in hand, and you pretend to be writing in it, even if you aren't, because Mercury likes that. And so, if you connect that with the more Renaissance idea of planetary children, where you have the woodcuts, where there's planet's chariot, and there's everybody whose revolutions the planet is familiar with.
Yeah.
Down below, and so you're as part of the petition, you're like, see me as child.
Yeah, this and that is a perfect match, because the perspectivist approach can be slid under how shapeshifting works in Siberia and so on, which is how you behave to elk people, which are elk, so that they either see you or don't see you as hunter or as elk wife or whatever it happens to be. And that is kind of, and I because particularly you can decide ways of calculating it. That's what this guy's for. But think about the child thing and performative ritual, and how can Venus see you until you are something that Venus sees.
Right.
And can Venus only see, not only see, but Venus will see non-Venusian things differently to Venusian things, right? And so once you kind of, that's the intellectual part, or the intellectual framework that will allow you to competently experiment beyond the language of talismans, because that is the language of talismans.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, good.
Yeah, well, and and we talked a little about this a little bit at So Below, but part of this science and art,
gay science and art,
right? Part of what takes it beyond an imposed grid and into a discovered set of pre-existing structures which have a use is, so for example, when you're doing the petition to Jupiter, the Picatrix program says, dress like a Byzantine Christian. Now, that doesn't mean...
Done.
Right? And so we could, if we're going to be fundamentalists and literalists, we would say, well, if we're going to do that Jupiter operation, we need to dress like a Byzantine Christian. Or is that just the best example at that period of time for a child of Jupiter?
Well, consider Byzantium at the time of the Picatrix being the capital of the Roman Empire. It is the home of the emperor. And they were Christians.
It's the home of the Christian world, and they're anyway.
So that's the language piece. One, I would recommend doing that to start with, because I will always recommend staying as close to the text as possible to start with. But look at what that perspectivist language is saying, which is like the terrestrial home of the best match to Jupiter is there and is Christian. Yeah. Like it is a Christian empire.
Right.
So that's the kind of, and once you've got that language, once you work out what the logic of that language, it's really quite fun to start thinking. I mean, obviously I do it here with plant placement and timing.
Well, let me just lead this back to one of the points I was trying to make is, okay, so there's the Byzantine Christian thing. But if you understand to what degree you are Jupiter's child, where are you Jupiter, then presenting what you actually are that really is Jupiterian, wearing that on the outside in the middle of that operation is going to fit perfectly because it's already there. And, you're not like, I'm a Byzantine Christian.
Yeah.
It's like, you're probably not.
Yeah.
Whereas you are Jupiterian in some ways, right?
So we've just been talking about talismans, and one of the things before we hit record, which was really kind of useful, Dr. Aaron Cheek, who's been on the show, and you guys just stayed with him. Kate and Austin were just over in Kiwiland. I'm staying with Aaron. You guys, after the show, were having a chat about how talismans work. And we had a really good discussion this morning, kind of riffing on how we would describe how talismans specifically work. And I think open with, tell us a little bit about what, your Aaron and your exchange and what you said and what he said, and I'll get onto my Tolkien crap after that.
Okay, yeah. And I said a little bit of this at So Below, and then Aaron and I were talking, I don't know, maybe 4 days ago, and we recorded some of this.
Oh, cool. Okay.
So
Sorry.
I've got some. No, it's okay. These are ideas which I think need developed, which means conversing with different people over and over again. But basically, the idea which arises from my experience with talismans is also, as well as their construction, is that there is a density of being to them, where you have something which is, it's got a body which is in part stone or metallic, but it's been suffumigated with plant matter. It has, maybe it's also been anointed with oil. I've put bodily energy into it. There's maybe a little bit of my skin on it. There's there's the psychic energy I poured into its creation. There's the celestial energy that was called down. All of these things are the same thing existing at different levels. Like you were saying, like it's the sun as gold, the sun as I don't know, a lion's tooth, the sun as a particular scent from a particular plant, the sun as what I was wearing when I made that, the sun is what my state of mind, what I held in my mind as, you know, as I performed the critical operation. That those are, and so you have a functional talisman is all of those levels of being at once.
Hyper
right?
thick.
Yeah, it's hyper thick. And what I was saying is that it feels like when somebody says, "Oh, well, how does it work?" So the big ones that are not made to accomplish a single purpose, right? Not the I would like to get the job that I'm applying for tomorrow magic, which is great magic, but it's different. But the like I'm bringing this into being in my life. It feels like it deforms, in a good way, the territory of life in much the same way that you see the Einsteinian understanding of gravity depicted, where it's the bowling ball on the sheet, where you get a curvature to the space-time, because that's how talismans seem to work, especially when you wear, you know, a good way to test something that you've made is wear it out in public where you could have any range of different interactions. Like go into a place where there's a fair amount of randomness and see what slides towards you. And, you know, I was saying to Aaron that it feels like that kind of bigger magic feels more like terraforming your kingdom, like changing the structure of the, you know, mountains or hills or valleys and built structures, so that, you know, the rain, you know, maybe the river just feeds what you're doing, and the, you know, the boulders aren't in a place to cascade down a hill into you because you haven't built underneath the boulders or you've sculpted. It feels like kingdom sculpting. And what he responded with, which is really interesting, is he was talking about he spent a lot of time on Schwaller de Lubitz, and he's like, that's interesting. Schwaller, one of the ways he describes magic is that you're connecting to a reservoir or a river, you know, the sort of liquid source, and then living the magical life and getting it to the right places is building irrigation ditches so that power goes to where you need it to, and then it naturally feeds what you're working on. And
I'm just going to move this. I'm going to move it that way. You'll see my irrigation pipes that just showed up minutes before we had that discussion. I'm like, that's so cool. Like,
Schwaller would approve.
Yes, he would. Because I mean, that's very Egyptian of him. Like, you can see, it's such a beautiful way of describing it, because you can see like taking water from the Nile and irrigating it through the ditches on the lentil fields beside the Nile, as this is how you bring a specific kind of magic that is not there the way it's supposed to be. It's over there into your life so that things flourish. And it's a really beautiful way of thinking about the impact of talismans. But it's why I wanted to end with this discussion of how they work is when I was 19 and still as Tolkien obsessed as I am now, I was at university and I was reading Lord of the Rings on my balcony. And I'm like, how does, this is before I got full Dr. Bekatanas on it, like, how does the ring work? How does the One Ring work? Like, all it does is make you invisible. So, like, why is everyone after it? And why did Sauron put, like, a third of himself in it? In something that he could drop in a drain? Like, it seems like a poor business strategy. If you already have that power, why did you put it in a ring? And so I was kind of ruminating on how I think with that, because I was doing some really dodgy attempts, although one of them worked quite well, of making some magic rings, or at least imbuing antique junk store rings that had the right semi-precious stones with different qualities. And it felt like, so if you picture something as contentious as an auric field being the numbers, like lots of number 3s around you, and you need a number 7 influence, right? And you're walking through a whole bunch of 2s, like a cloud of 2s in your life, so that what's happening around you is 5 rather than 7. With the creation of a ring or a talisman, you kind of add 2 to it, so that as you're sort of moving through life, you get those 7s. And it's about working out numerically in my head, like literally little grids of numbers in the universe. Like, it's about working out which number adjustment you need to make in your life, so that as you move through something that otherwise wouldn't land correctly, it lands as 7s. And when Austin was talking about the sort of bowling ball topology, I'm like, that's actually how it feels. It feels like it has warped. And that's what I settled on for the One Ring. Like, the reason he did it is that it changes the conditions of reality around the owner towards one of total victory. And so that's why he made the ring. And that was him kind of shifting the numbers so that the sevens would happen. And for me, changing the conditions of reality around is what a talisman does, like, amongst other things. You've said to Tony, who I think was in, at least Tony was in the first chat. Hi, Tony. I hope you're in the second.
Tony,
when you said like like an initiation, and I called it. So I'm just kind of really happy that we, after doing the H1 forecast, we got to have a little bit more of a you and I talk that would have made people cry in their seats if we just kept them in the seats at the event, to kind of get like, here's a way of thinking with talismans so that it is interoperable on the planet, and also here's a way of thinking with how they feel in your life.
Mm-hmm.
So anything else you care to add, or should we throw over to questions?
I think that's pretty good.
I think we did, Mercury notwithstanding, this has been fun.
Yeah. No, I think that's good. I think we can move to questions.
That'd be sweet.
And there'll probably be some questions which will tease more out of what we were just talking about, which is sort of, those are, I would say that those are recently discovered thoughts. Yeah.
So remember, I don't know if you've read the blog post that had all the images from the event. After I came off stage, Kate asked me, like, would you like a drink? And I felt really like, oh yeah, thank you. Like, you don't have to get me a drink. She said, I was going to the bar anyway. So because Kate's actually going to give us our first question, our chat wrangler. And then she's apparently going to get us drinks. And I feel super guilty about it because it's my house.
Such a bad host.
I know, right? Yeah. But yeah, so Kate, do we want to, like, have you got a first cab off the rank? I'll check my DMs. That's how we were going to do it. Actually, my phone has been out in this baking sun, so you might actually want to tell me because okay, I'll just wait for my phone to turn back on. Oh, actually, no. I'm just going to drop the screen so we stop looking at ourselves, and I'll do it there. Sent through Twitter. Bohemio Soloing. I can't do that. Bohemio Soloing. Oh, I get it. That's cool. Can we think about planets as living conscious beings?
I think that's implied by everything we just said.
Yeah, I do. Like, it's the assertion of personhood for an intellectual reason is useful for getting Western magic over what Alfred Whitehead called our last 3 provincial centuries, where we just decided humans were the only persons around. So it's useful as an intellectual exercise, but also when I had Dr. Rupert Sheldrake on, for instance, his thing, and you know how I feel about panpsychism, I'm not a fan, but he says, well, if matter is in some sense conscious, is the sun a specific kind of consciousness? It is a natural implication of the panpsychic universe. It is guaranteed in an animist one. So I agree. I don't think you can avoid thinking about planets specifically as persons, whether the planets in our solar system are 100% identical to the forces in the universe that we use the planets to time and describe is probably not. Like, it's an open and more interesting question. But on a baseline level of essentially an animist ontology, yes, planets are people.
And I would add to that, that why would they give a shit about us?
Yeah.
Dude, we're the only entertainment around
for
a long time. Like, it's not that we're the only life in the universe, but we're interesting. Like, we're very, I mean, like, we like to watch ourselves on television, and when we're not feeling the agony of those dramas, it's terribly entertaining.
Yeah.
Like, this is the only terrarium around for a while. And so, like, yeah, like, do they care? Yes.
Probably. This is like a very Terence McKenna thing to say, because he said, as far as we can see with the Hubble telescope and everything, we appear to be the apple of the universe's eye. Like, he knows there's other stuff around, clearly, Terence did, but like, as far as we can see, like, we're fucking interesting.
Yeah.
Well, yeah. Us specifically. Fun and interesting.
And so, that's sort of my it's sort of the answer to this sort of lazy idea of, like, well, the universe is so vast and we're so small. And I like that vision of the universe is useful for humility, and there's a truth about humility there, but it's a partial truth that misses actually we're kind of the best show around for a couple light years.
Brian's got one. What will the transits for the first half of 2019 look like in terms of government controls and the lack of faith in government cycle? I would say a lot of that is more, unsurprisingly, at 2020. But for me, my guess would be Uranus.
I mean, it looks like a lack of faith in government. It looks like it. So 2018 through 2020 are a trio of years all laced together by Saturn, and the spectacular finale is in 2020.
Yeah.
And we're gonna, we're well on our way. We're even more on our way in 2019.
Really? You can stand up. You're the pretty one.
And so that looks like, yeah, baby.
Thank you, lovely.
Say
Thank
hi.
you so much.
Say hi. You're much more.
I was gonna rise up behind you.
I'm sorry, we ruined it.
Too much of a ledge.
Yeah. Funnily enough, as you're continuing with that, the next one from Big Dirty Us, is there any corresponding astrological events in the past decade that seem most significant to explain the more public divide?
I want to finish answering the previous one.
Yeah, but they seem like they are of a piece. That's why I wanted to jump it in. Explain the more public divide between politicians and global media and people and so on, because that's two of the same things. It's
yeah, that is two of the same thing.
What in the space weather looks like Martin Armstrong's thing, right?
Well, we would have this with just the Saturn and Pluto coming together.
Yeah.
But then we basically get that doubled down on or further intensified and explored in more layers because of the South Node's presence there. And it's the less faith there is in an authority structure, the more force that authority structure has to use in order to maintain its current power. Yeah. Like it's that vicious cycle. Like that's obviously where we are. Yeah. It's obviously going to get worse before it gets better. Yeah. And that goes, whether it's a financial system or a legal system or whatever, that's where we're at. And that's a tension point that gets us to change. Yes. But it doesn't, it actually feels like the most agonizing opposite of change. Yeah. I would like to hang a lamp on that as well. Like we don't get, like it gets worse, but then it gets better, and it won't get better unless it gets worse. Like this has to fully unwind until the cosmos realizes like this. And so plan for that, like rely, this isn't like not everybody can or should move out to an organic farm in Tasmania, but like, some of you should. Yeah. But plan to plant your Odin seeds and and count on being able to harvest those. The more entwined your welfare is in those systems which are not in a good place, the more your outlook is tied to them. See, this is what I think for me, the sort of newsletter medicine of Uranus and Taurus is like the salvation doesn't come from the system that is toxifying to the point of collapse. The salvation comes from new theaters of insurrection and interaction, and they are earth-based because of course they are. It's Taurus. Well, and it's not just you. It's not necessarily maybe this is a thing. In kind of restoring or reviving the heroic, we have a tendency, and this is partially a tendency that comes from the way the stories are told, but to conceive of the heroic primarily on individual terms, but like thinking of the heroic on community terms, or maybe a coven level of community. That's just perfect. That's market gardens. That's having your analog coven or family or tribe connected via various digital and non-digital means as we go through this. And that's that really fluid, transformative, multi-dimensional earth. We were actually talking about whether this is why I put Austin by the plant, so that if I fell, it would be really, really funny. He would just kind of tip a little bit into a plant. It would probably be worse because I would be entangled in the plant. All right. Ariel asks, how do the January eclipses compare to the ones from July? But that's a tricksy question because that's an H2 one, but we'll allow it. Ariel's at this point, and I haven't written my big 2019 piece yet. I've been thinking about it for most of a month, and I've got the images and the ideas, but I need to kind of sit down and grit it out and figure out how to tell the story. I'm less into the Cancer season ones. Sure. I think January it'll be strong Saturn brew, but it's the Cancer side. So the July side, when the sun is in tropical Cancer, that Cancer brings the deeply personal into it, and you kind of don't want to feel all that Saturn stuff. And so I feel like that one's going to be harder, at least subjectively, because it's going to require us to feel more of that.
This is a good one. With intent, or can talismans be definitionally a talisman is created, but if you mean like is gold in the ground a solar talisman? No, it's probably something solar. But if you mean can talismans be found fully formed? Well, yes, because there's a thriving industry in actually creating talismans, and then you can either buy them or you inherit them or what have you. So if you mean talismans in the sense of the one ring gets found by Smeagol fully formed, then yes. But if you mean like, can you encounter a Jupiterian talisman fully formed in the wild? I'm going to go with no, definitionally. But you can definitely encounter Jupiterian stuff.
Well, and what I would yes, and let's say that you came into possession of a ring that a Eastern Orthodox priest, Byzantine Christian, wore for every day of his life for 50 years, that happened to, let's say, had a yellow sapphire on it. So, the correct stone, and was, let's say it was gold, or it's probably not going to be tin. So let's say gold, which sometimes gets used for Jupiter. And so you have somebody who is a child of that planet, recognizably, almost caricaturized child of that planet, with an object of exactly the right material. If you come into contact with that and you wear that, that's going to have a charge because it has a story. It was part of a very Jupiterian story. It's not a Jupiter talisman, but that thing is almost a Jupiter talisman. Yeah. Or, and the same thing could be said, or like the dog tags of a soldier who served, 3 tours of duty and saw all sorts of stuff like that. That's an object with a story. And insofar as we're talking about talismans as objects which tend to change the story around them by being part of a story for long enough, they'll have some of that residual power, but there's still like a jump between the accidental and the intentionally inscribed and created. Absolutely.
And so it will do most of the things, if not all, like 95% of the things that Jupiter talisman will do. But like, this is one of the reasons why, one of the big takeaways for me that I wanted from the audience at So Below was like, just as talisman creation is a thing, it is that is a specific kind of astrological magic. It's absolutely not the only one. So this is sort of a related question. Big Dirty asks, Green Pastors does the child of / wardrobe approach when summoning grimoire work when summoning grimoire spirits too? It is structurally identical, but it's not the same thing, because and this is why we're like the premium members and I have been really kicking the tires on this perspectivist approach, because what you are doing, like, it is not clear to me that a grimoire spirit will see you unless you are adorned with the things that particular manual says to be adorned with. Lion's pelt belt, paper Jupiter crown, and also the fact that it's paper to us, perhaps they see a paper Solomon crown, perhaps they see an actual crown. So it is structurally identical, which is what I find significant. But dressing up as a Byzantine Christian, unless, and there is not a grimoire that I'm aware of that requires you to do that, will not be a sufficient replacement for sticking to the manual and saying that you're doing Solomonic magic.
Right. Well, but there is a uniform.
Yes. Right. Yes.
And so in the sense that there are uniform requirements.
Yes. Yeah. That's a good one. Marion asks, how do the astrological elements relate possibly to the Hermetic elements? Is there a way to sidestep opposing astrological elements across the Hermetic pendulum?
The astrology that we're talking about
is the same.
Is literally like, you can't have Hermeticism without the astrology we've been talking about.
Yeah.
You don't have astrology without Hermeticism.
Yeah.
Just because astrology is not always, just because someone isn't talking about the fact that this is a Hermetic art, doesn't invalidate the fact that it moved it was carried historically with all the other Hermetic arts.
Sure.
It depends on the same logic and structure, deeper structures.
So exactly. So Marion, the implications of what Austin and I are kind of exploring when it comes to space magic, to call it something annoying, is that they're identical. It is the one language. It's just that the historical processes that too long to go into now have split up things that shouldn't have been split up. And crucially, though, we can't put it back together textually only. Like it's a permanently crashed spaceship, just because of the nature of having had so many texts and whatever lost to us. But we can performatively find a way back to it that is satisfactory to begin the next 100 years of exploring this language. Kurt here's a weird one. I like this. What would be the Earth influence on someone born on Mars?
I think that it would probably be centering and calming.
Cool. Yeah. How are we going to do that? I guess it's the same, isn't it? We just need to work out what Earth is.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mars is your ground energy.
Yeah.
Right? Like Mars, whatever that planet's energy, consciousness, etc. is, that's going to be a given, just like Earth energy is a given here. So that martial power will be a given, and then Earth will be an influence that shifts. And that'll probably be like where you're actually like grounded and maybe feel like home.
Yeah. This is
stable.
Yeah. This is what I'm sure you've answered before, but I like the way Tonya has phrased this. Is consciousness a thing around a natal chart? For example, if you are conscious of your chart cast in Placidus and you live your life with that awareness, but the chart is different in whole signs. This actually, one of the things about a decade ago that got me back to astrology, and the thing that I'm trying to solve, is that it works on everyone, because we have like Soviet and we have 120 years of empirical research to show like we have a correlation between big events and shit going on in the skies, right? That's not a sufficient explanation for how come it works so much fucking better in someone's life who is aware of it. And I have this, I look at it from a share trading perspective. If you understand astrology to a sufficient degree, you get higher highs and higher lows. Because you are kind of leaning into how the universe is flowing, right? So you can have both of those things in your head. Like if your chart, if you are mentally used to a Placidus chart, you're going to get higher highs and higher lows in that way. But it doesn't mean you should. I mean, you should probably be looking at the whole sign one more anyway. But it doesn't mean you can't look at both of them, because the whole point of, I guess, astrological linguistic literacy is to get those higher highs and higher lows rather than just be buffeted around by the universe.
Yeah,
those are my thoughts.
Yeah, I would agree with that. So any system that you use to define yourself, right, that is serves a skeletal function as far as your identity structure goes, or serves a skeletal structuring function for how you think life works, changes your ideas or intersects with your ideas of self and world. And your ideas of self and world always matter. And so if you're using Placidus to prop that up, then it matters on that level.
That's good. I
can still look at your chart using the sidereal zodiac and whole sign houses and pull out a lot of things that are real. But or I could use Regiomontanus, or I could use a mixture of whole signs and angles or whatever. Like all of them, like all of the real astrology methods work in and of themselves. But if you lean into one, even just mentally, that does matter. That does change the way you see things. The way you see things changes the way things work.
Are you, like, the sun's come back around to hit you there, and you're as white as I am? Are you all right for now? Because we can slide you. We can just move the camera.
Let's rotate just a little bit.
All right. So, bear with while we do a technical change. I can answer. B89 asks, could you guys speak on ways to differentiate between noise and signal? Honestly, practice is the best, and make peace with the fact that you're only going to get like 80% right. at best, and you will mistake noise for signal. That's humans.
But that's how you get good at it.
Yeah.
Is trying, is attempting to differentiate noise from signal.
All right, I got to bring my video back up.
Okay.
Keep going.
But
Keep going.
both succeeding and failing over time is how you get good at anything.
Yeah.
Like how do you teach discernment?
Yeah.
Right, because that's just a specific, that's a discernment focused in a particular area. There's no direct way to get perfect at discernment and then go around discerning. Sure.
And that, it's just practice and be gentle, but also vigorous with yourself. I noticed this, obviously. With you when you make a mistake, or you won't learn the next time. Like if you are kind of lying to yourself that noise was signal, and crucially signal that you quote unquote caused with magic, and like you have to be really firm but gentle with yourself, or otherwise you won't improve. And I see a lot of people, not a lot, but a sizable chunk of people in magic who will over narrativize the noise, and that's not it might be a great way to live, but that's not a recipe for getting better at magic.
Can I just jump in? I'll just say, knowing the own bad thinking traps that you like, knowing the traps that are within you, like the kind of mistakes of perception that you make. If you can get familiar with your flaws, then it's easier to be like, oh, I'm doing it again.
Yeah, exactly. And yeah, that's the great way of thinking about it. This one is a one-word answer. But Sally asks, what's a good book for talisman info?
Picatrix.
One-word answer. Like it begins. There's a fresh one coming out January, or it might actually be out in the US already.
I don't think it's out yet.
Okay, yeah.
Or at least it wasn't last time before I left for Australia.
But there isn't a book that isn't the Picatrix. I mean, there is, but like it is a mandatory. The Talismanic Magic shelf has one mandatory book.
Yes.
And it's Picatrix.
And there are other things which are good and valuable, et cetera, but like if you actually understand the Picatrix, then you're good.
Yeah. Yeah.
There may be other books which can help you understand what is being said in the Picatrix. And the Picatrix itself is a collection of probably more than 100 texts with an author saying, okay, the point of this and what we learn from this and the principles by which this fragment operates is this. And if you understand that, blah, 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 blah. But the Picatrix is the irreplaceable tome.
And Sally, if you already have it, what I would follow up with is, well, if I've got the Picatrix, then honestly, even just going to academia.edu, a really useful way of jailbreaking from a standing start the Picatrix is to get some historical and cultural context behind it. And so there isn't really a good book yet, I'm sure there will be, that kind of gives you that, but there's plenty of stuff that's been written on the Arabic sciences that is freely available from an academic context on the internet. So get the Picatrix and get the context, and you are flying.
Also, I taught I guess it was maybe a 5-week class last year on just like the method of creating talismans as described in the Picatrix, as well as, and I also use Agrippa as a source, but primarily the Picatrix, where I basically do a how-to and it's a why. It's a why-to as well as a how-to. Like, here's the how, and then this is the logic behind it. Here are the range of things we might do here. Here are the sources. But it's a how-to with the why explored at every step. And so I think I would be very disappointed if that didn't at least provide significant help in cracking open the Picatrix.
Yeah.
And so the recording of that is available on the website.
Cool. Brian asked the question that will take Austin 5 hours to answer.
No, it'll take me 10 seconds.
Okay, good. I'll speak to you after class, Brian. Has Austin's understanding of Rahu and Ketu changed since your Jyotish studies?
A little bit. I didn't really appreciate the nodes, Rahu and Ketu, until I encountered the Jyotish perspective on them, which was in 2001.
Okay.
It was the first time I was reading, what is it, Ancient Hindu Astrology for the Modern Western Astrologer, which was sort of like the only Vedic book in the 90s. in English. And so I read that, and I read the delineation. I was like, oh, that's what my nodes mean. I found it in my life, in myself. And so that's always been part of my understanding of the nodes. Like going full on study this whole year is deepened that, but I already had it. It was already pointed in that direction. So I wouldn't say it changed it fundamentally. It just deepened what was already a core part of my understanding.
10 Austin seconds. Green Pastor asks, how can an astro noob conceptualize the interaction between Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto compared with the traditional planets?
So one easy, useful way to do it, and this is a good thing to do when you're stuck in astrology, is what is the literal physical truth? You cannot see Uranus, Neptune, or Pluto with the naked eye. Therefore, they correspond with layers of our world which are real but invisible. Also, Pluto is an entirely different thing than Uranus and Pluto. Uranus and Pluto fit the definition of planet easily and completely, the astronomical definition of planet easily and completely. Pluto is a thing from probably not our solar system. We're from a completely different layer of our solar system. It's tiny. Its orbit is extremely eccentric. We obviously need to treat it as something very different from the rest of the planets. Yeah. And so, yeah, that's what I would say.
That is a perfect animist epistemological answer. I love it. Like you start with the primacy of sensory experience and build from there. That's excellent. Ryan asks, can Austin recommend an astrology book for their new book club? Other than his own, but I guess you mean like this is the same question that Chris Brennan got asked on Twitter. Like, what's book one for Manstrological Studies?
Yeah. So we were talking about maybe I'll get to that at some point next year, but that's who knows. I think Chris Brennan's book is excellent, and Demetra George's book. God, what's it called? It's her big book on Hellenistic. It's in 2 volumes, and the first one is like 2 weeks from being out. Yeah. Demetra George's new book through Ribido Press is going to be a monster. Demetra's amazing. I cannot wait.
It's paid, pre-ordered. I'm checking the mailbox.
Yeah, so that one's irreplaceable. It's just not quite here yet. Chris's Hellenistic Astrology, the study of fate and fortune, is a fantastic. It's fantastic beginner book, but also intermediate book. Yeah. It's a great book.
All right. Brian asks, oh no, hang on. Oh no. So Melvin asks, when will we get the 36 Faces new edition? Ryan and Melvin, were they listening last night?
By the end of the first quarter.
Nice. We'll hold him to that.
Yeah, no, it's if I didn't have such a busy fall, I would have gotten it done by Christmas. But it's going to get done. Right. It's going to get done. We'll get it hopefully done before the Mercury Retrograde, which begins on March 5th.
Tickety talk. Brian, again, what does astrological magic on the fly look like? Trash fire to start.
I don't know. Sometimes. So sometimes if I know that there is and this is actually something that you can kind of work this year. So, for example, if I'm like, I know Jupiter's in Sag the whole year. Jupiter's good in Sag. I know it's still direct. Okay, it's a Thursday, and I know the moon is actually in a trine with it. It's not right now. It's moving towards conjunction. But let's just say, it's like, oh, okay, the moon's in early Aries, and it's trining in, and it's not messed with anything. I'm like, the conditions are right for a little something. I have done a number of times, like a little quickie, sort of halfway between a sigil and a paper talisman to nudge something, and that's not a talisman I'll keep. But if I know the conditions are good enough, I will do a little nudge and warping with that. Right. But you have to know the conditions.
All right. So operationally, if you don't have either of the two more or less expensive pieces of software, basically you're playing like near-term election bingo using astro.com and go, oh yeah, that's not that shit. I can do something with that. Yeah, so astro.com get free and kind of click forward and backwards and whatever and see where you are and what have you. That, I guess, if you mean operationally how that looks, Brian, That's how it looks. Otherwise, you can pay the hundreds of dollars and get the fancy astrological software.
But yeah,
this is a B. Welcome B.
It looks like a lot of other. It looks like a lot of other on the fly stuff, which is quickly formulated and mobilized squiggles. Maybe it's in the dirt in front of a house. Maybe it's in a little piece of paper you have in your pocket with with the right diagrams to call those forces. But it's it's a little quick reality graffiti.
Kelsey asks a question that she knows how I'm going to answer. Does the concept of planetary spheres still hold much magical use? And if so, do the ones beyond Saturn feel like they correspond to Uranus and Neptune? You go.
If we're just conceptualizing stars out, we can do that with planets. We can do that with any way that we want to chunk up and chunk down, space, right? Yeah. There's a more complicated answer. It depends. And see, this question is coming from maybe it's a Kabbalistic point of view. Maybe it's like the Neoplatonic spheres. There are a couple different variants of those concentric spheres, and I think that you can keep that idea without necessarily keeping the shape exactly the same. Like, you don't necessarily need it to be 10 in number.
Yeah.
As I wrote in my essay in the Celestial Art, there is the heliopause. Like there's the point where the sun is radiating outward, and there's basically a bubble well beyond the planets, and it's the point where the sun's power and the interstellar medium's power are about equal. And so the sun's radiation is shooting out at God knows, millions of miles an hour, and it slows to like 500 miles an hour when it hits the interstellar medium. So we are literally in a giant egg. Yeah. And we're in the sun part of the egg, and that's a sphere, right? Yeah. And then there's a heliosheath, et cetera, et cetera. There are the orbits of the planets. Like, the sphere model is not wrong. It just needs, the sphere model actually fits on what we know about the physical world in the 21st century. You just have to, you can keep spheres, but maybe don't keep exactly the same categories they were using in the 3rd century AD.
Yeah, that's great, because my answer, as you probably know, Kelsey, would be as a begrudging shorthand. Because it is occasionally tactically useful, but I'm pretty allergic to the sort of Neoplatonic approach as a description of reality. I prefer the more horizontal, technically hermetic one we were discussing during the show proper. But great question, and you knew how I was going to answer that. Kelsey always asks, not leading questions, but questions to get me to say things like that. Ariel asks, what even am a star? I'm going to be glib and say
that's a pretty glib question.
Yeah. She's benignly trolling. It is a campfire of our ancestors, according to the Burung, and I will say that and move forward, because I basically keep to that, frankly. Yeah.
A star is the best single definition of being.
Ah, that was good. Yeah, and that's it's way better than Crowley, because most things are. Cameron asks, what are the main differences between faster planet perfection years and slower years?
They're faster and slower.
Yeah, that is the main difference.
You've answered the question. You got it. And so to be a little bit less asshole-ish about that. So whenever a chart is tied to one planet more than others, and that can be a whole life thing, that can be a that's what's up this year thing, then life will tend to move not only at the pace but also the rhythm of a planet, right? So the moon moves quickly, it waxes and wanes quickly, but it never goes retrograde. Right? Mercury changes speed, direction, and the amount of light it has more quickly than any other body. And so, it disappears and appears. It's fast, it's slow, et cetera, et cetera. And so that's what a mercurial year feels like, or a mercurial life feels like. It's above the ground, below the ground, up in the sky, hiding over there, appearing here, that's Mercury. And so, you know, all of like each of the planets' speeds and types of motion relative to us are descriptive of a narrative. Like that's the song of that planet.
I love it. I love it. Brian, again, when will we have Mars in Aquarius for as long again? And what's going to be different about Mars this coming year?
So it's going to be, I don't know that we'll have Mars in Aquarius that long again. It might be 30 years. It might be 50. I'd have to look 15. There's a chance 15 to 17 years ahead, but Mars's synodic cycles are the most irregular among the planets. So you literally, with Venus, you know what's going to happen every 8 years.
Very elegant.
With Mars, it's like there's some symmetry every 15 to 17, but you've got to look at it and be like, okay, that's kind of similar. So I can't tell you with Mars. What is the difference with Mars this year? So one, Mars is direct this year. And for the first half of the year, Mars is not only direct, it is oriental or morning rising. And so morning, sorry, it's not morning rising, it's occidental, which means evening rising. No, I was doing it wrong in my head. It's direct.
Right.
It's direct, and it will be in each sign for 5 weeks. And so it's just like an orderly progression through the signs. It's just what it is. It's not, there's no back and forth. There's no slowing down. There's like minute speeding up.
Gotcha.
But it's normal Mars.
Here's a question I'm not sure you'll be able to answer with specific detail until you do it, but what will be different in the new edition of Handsome Faces, and do I need to replace my old copy? That's what I call 36 Faces, obviously.
I haven't decided yet.
Yeah.
I have a lot. I know what decisions I need to make, and I'm like, oh, I don't want to agonize over that until I have to. I think it's not going to be like a full second edition, but it's not just going to be a reprint.
Yeah.
It'll probably be like a 1.3 or maybe, and, you know, I would like to maybe, and so, you know, I haven't made any of these decisions. If I add some material, I would like to make that available to people who bought the first edition. You know, though obviously some of the typos will be fixed. But the primary structure will still be there. Maybe I add like one section and maybe I make that available to people. So
if you, I would say, because I use it, if you're operationally working with the deckhands, like the book you have is good, but like we were talking last night about how much more from pretty much experience that like you've learned from it that might reframe it, but it's too early in the creative process to work out what that would be. But if you're operationally using it, you can keep, it's not like that stuff's going to change. But
yeah, there's not going to be a giant curveball.
It's like, turns out there's actually only 29.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's going to be, you know, I finished writing that in 2013. And so like, yeah, it's been 5 years. And when you put a book out, then everybody gives you what information they have about that topic.
Oh, that's wonderful. Isn't it?
Yeah. And so it's great. And so like, I know some more things and I have to figure out like, what's just like a detail that is fascinating to me because I got really into that topic and like what changes any of the shapes that are in 36 Faces, if any, and what additions can I make? So these are just questions I have to answer.
Yeah. Eris asks, how useful do you find asteroids and fixed stars? And,
I find fixed stars
approximately
70 times more useful than
asteroids.
Exactly. They're the big 4 asteroids, which I've seen people do some interesting stuff with. But if you cut down to about like the 20 most important fixed stars, they're massively powerful.
And there's
they utterly change the way that you would interpret a planet which is conjoined them. Like, you know, for example, if you're interpreting Venus in Libra, or Venus at the end of Taurus, right? You're like, oh, Venus rules Taurus, blah blah blah, good Venus stuff. But then it's conjunct Kaput Algol. Then you have to add this whole, you know, Gorgon decapitation, lust for primordial release, etc., etc. Like, so Princess Di, for example, had Venus in Libra conjunctipodalgal. And yes, like Venus in its rulership, she was a pretty lady that all the people in her country loved as a pretty lady. She was also decapitated.
Yeah.
Right. Like the you have to add the algol.
Yeah. I would add from a starship's perspective that the stars came first. The stars are older and implicated in the entire story of the history of mankind around the planet. Asteroids are things that you find in space. So, like, stars are what we're about. Well, it's definitely what I'm about, right? Cool. Good question, though. And I liked that it was asteroids and fixed stars. So one is useless, one is essential.
Asteroids aren't useless.
Come on.
They're not useless.
I'm racist against asteroids.
You can do, I don't think you should. If you just memorize the fixed stars, and you can tell which the top 10 are because they're the most important throughout history to everyone and they're super bright in the sky.
Yeah.
If you memorize those and you just know, oh, if a planet is around like 9 Gemini, it's, you know, it's sitting on Aldebaran, add Aldebaran to it. And so if you get familiar with and just add like, you know, top 10, that'll let you know when you need to, like, when you must bring the fixed stars in. Not every star matters.
Yeah,
most of them don't.
How do you reconcile? This is a good one, but also because it's like a half sentence answer. How do you reconcile sidereal and tropical astrology?
They're different ways of looking at the same thing.
Yeah.
One is you're looking at it through the lens of the Sun-Earth cycle. That's tropical. That's a real thing. The other is you're drawing the circle from one star all the way around to that same star again. And it's anchored to the sidereal. They're different things. They change in relationship to each other. That relationship with each other is actually what gives you the great year, right? That's where, you know, like, like they're supposed to be seen relative to each other on a grand sense. Both work fantastic on their own terms if you take them on their own terms. And don't, you know, you need to get over the confusion of, oh, but these two things are both called Aries, but tropical Aries is not the same as sidereal Aries.
Yeah.
And neither of those, the sidereal is also not the pure constellational, because the pure, like the sky itself, like the stars themselves, are not cut into orderly 30-degree constellations. Virgo is like 40-some degrees long, and constellations overlap. So there's like raw stars, sidereal, tropical. They're all organizational frameworks, which they're all organizational frameworks which show you different stuff. Don't try to make them one thing, and don't play right and wrong with them. Say, what does this do? And look through it and learn the techniques that people who've been using that wheel use, and they will work. And you'll see what you can see through that lens.
Samantha's question is great. At So Below, Austin mentioned working with Kali for someone with Saturn and Cancer, for example. Are there other Vedic or Hindu recommendations that you know of? And any books or so on the topic?
So I've been studying with Freedom Cole for the last year formally, and I've been rating his books for information for several years before that, which is why I started studying with him. His Science of Light, Volume 1 and 2, go over a lot of these principles. And so those are the best books in English that I am aware of. It's high level stuff. Freedom, it doesn't really pull punches.
What I would recommend, because I've had some of the benefit of this, is if you're interested in what components of Vedic astrology, particularly from a remediation and just better working with angle, is I'm going to recommend, like, get a consult, because there are people out there, and I'm sitting next to one of them, who will, and particularly if you're vibing on that, we'll work out where you are and what needs to happen. But yes, Freedom's books are a good choice. But like, it's because, as you say, like, this is high level stuff, and it's one of the kind of cutting edge areas of where astrology is at. Is like, how do these things be an improved dialogue now that the quote unquote West has kind of got its act together a bit more over the last few decades?
Well, it's grown up enough to actually dialogue.
Yeah,
with,
exactly.
like, a sophisticated Jyotish.
Yeah. A question for me, Gordon, any books planned for 2019? That's a one-word answer. Yes. To be fair, they were planned for this year, but it turns out like farming is hard and I don't know what I'm doing. So I have higher hopes for next year, but thank you for asking. Brian, again, which book should have Gordon used for, for Lunar Mansions instead of the one Austin burned him on, which you did? But like, he told me beforehand, but I'm like, yeah, but like this came to me in a way that I'm just going to vibe with. And he's like, yeah, but it's not. It's Austin's exact words were like, it's a remarkable document, which it is, like, because you guys, I gave you the premium members that at the beginning of the year saying, I'm going to see how I fuck up my life doing this. But I would realistically, because I am going to do that reset next year, it's not going to be a book. I'm going to be like, Austin, tell me what to do today.
I'm just going to take the way that the mansions are used in Jyotish in a simple electional manner, which is very simple and very sensible. And I will write those things down and I will give Gordon a spreadsheet.
All right. And of course, Brian, because you will hear all about it. And I'll presumably show up on one of the Q&As with like a black eye, I don't know, covered in blue, just messed up. But yeah, I'm doing that again. I'm doing my own self-experimentation again.
Well, and I want to. There's a Lunar Mansions version of the Deck and Walk that isn't a Deck and Walk, but it's whatever that walk is.
I'm really interested to find that. And what my experiment, because Brian knows this, the premium members too, my experiment at the beginning of the year was like, Lunar Days, as listed in Hygromantia, appear to work quite well as a to-do list. Like on day 6, it says, go and do this. And down here, I'm fortunate, I was saying before, like I have sailors and lumberjacks and markets and all these things where it's like you can
travel by sea, but do not plow.
Yeah.
Like you can literally do
that. So I'm in a really good situation. And for me, like it worked quite well. Using the Lunar Days as a kind of macro to-do list for one lunar cycle. I'm like, I'm going to see what happens with the mansions. And I didn't use the right mansions, but the jury is out as to whether Lunar Days, which are a specifically holy Egyptian list of lucky and unlucky days that we have from dynastic Egypt, that's quite good because it's literally a list of like, these things are good this day and these things aren't. Lunar Mansions are a very different animal. And I am really interested in finding what the performative version of Lunar Mansions are because I like them. And so, yes, I'm going to self-experiment and see what happens there. Cameron asked, this is a good one. I don't have an answer. If you had to choose a trump card for H1 2019, what would you choose?
I don't think it would be one card.
Yeah.
There's probably a 3-card spread.
Yeah, because you've got like the end of January wobbles, and then you've got you have to be end of January wobbles, and then you need a card for Uranus and Taurus, and then you need a card for the beginning of the couple of months of ass.
Okay, how about as a sequence like Devil, and I'm gonna go outside the maybe so Devil. And then Knight of Wands, and maybe those two on top of each other. Maybe Devil's on top of Knight of Wands. Yeah, Devil on top of Knight of Wands. I'll go. That'll be my 2-card spread. That'll be the center of the Celtic cross.
That's so good. But yeah, Knight of Wands. I was going to say, can we use pips? But do you believe? So this is Maxwell. Do you believe that the stars and planets influence us energetically, or that the stars correspond to some deeper metaphysical reality?
That's not an or. Yes, on both.
Yeah.
One of the things that I find over and over, I rediscover over and over again with astrology, is that it's part of why it's so interesting and works so well. Work is problematic term there, but is that it's operating on as many levels as possible. Yeah. It's doing the same thing as sortilege. There's a sortilege element, there's a theurgic element, there's a physical bodies with gravity element, there's a physical light element, there's a psychic light element, there's like a chi, prana, pneuma level element, and astrology is the product of all of those things.
So it's a good question, but the way it's phrased accidentally frames what was so bad about 20th century astrology. And it's actually happened a couple of times in the history of astrology where it's tried to look less impressive than it is to blend in with the other disciplines. And so and that happened literally in the first couple of centuries of the first millennium, where they tried. This was the first attempt at going, maybe it's an energetic model. As you saw the rise of monotheism and Neoplatonism, they're like, well, maybe it's just energies. And we had a similar trash fire situation in the 20th century where it tried to pretend it was psychology. And then even worse, it tried to pretend it's like, because we can technically record radiational influences with mechanical devices on this planet, that there must be some kind of actual beam effect of like Jupiter or Mars onto planet Earth. And these are crappy ideas from small minds who are trying to blend in with what I think are disciplines of a falsified belief system. The broken first century answer, which is like, it's
like, and those pieces are horribly wrong if you seize on like the radio waves emitted from Jupiter. That is part of the answer, but yeah, because it's because it's half of 1% of the answer, if you decide that is the whole answer, it becomes horribly wrong.
Yes.
But if you allow that to contribute to a large and rich answer, that's fine.
Yeah. And so good question there. Ethan asked, Gordon, what are your thoughts on Franz Bardon? I'm very curious. I have tremendous respect for his stuff. I've certainly read it. It's just not a thing I've personally resonated with. If I interact with people like premium members who've asked similar questions going, I really like this and I'm vibing with it. How does it fit in your kind of cosmology? I'm like, honestly, if you're vibing with it, like Franz Bardon was the real deal. I just don't resonate with how he conceptualizes the techniques. But honestly, anyone who is giving you like, do these things and then do these things, and then if you fucking do them, go for it. But it's not, it hasn't been a big influence on me. I've read the books, but it's not my stuff. I don't know if you have anything else to add on Mr. Bardon.
Yeah, a lot of respect for Franz Bardon. I've often regretted that I haven't had time or didn't make the time to fully work through his program. I like his stuff. I like the way it's shaped. One thing that's interesting that I would like to get some history on is, because I've done a bunch of Chinese martial arts and Qigong and stuff, when I read Franz Bardon stuff, I'm like, you seem like a guy who studied Qigong. There's like this very distinct taste, like pore breathing, for example.
Yeah.
I haven't encountered pore breathing anywhere except in Taoist energetics.
Israel Regati has some.
Where did he get it from?
Franz Bardon. Yeah.
Right. And so as an example, I'm like, was he like doing Tai Chi in the Czech Republic in 1923?
So, yeah. That's why like he smells like someone, like if you actually do his stuff, I have every confidence because I know people, Chris Bradford being an example, like Franz Bardon's quite a big influence on Chris Bradford during his Golden Dawn age. And he's like, I did that stuff and it was transformative. I'm like, well, of course it's going to be. Like, even as I just read it, I just haven't done it. I'm like, this is a guy who knows what's up and is like giving you techniques to get to how he operates. So I like him, but it's just not my thing. I've done
some of his, just some of the little, what are basically Raja Yoga exercises, like mental focus exercises. Like one thing I did for a while and still go back to because it's great is like, do 5 minutes of focusing on just one problem and don't let your attention change until you've solved it. Then do 5 minutes of complete void mind. Then do 5 minutes of picking one shape and color, and only doing that. Like he hits these different, like the exercises hit these like crucial mental functions of total release and like wide mind and then like perfect concentration. I love it.
Oh, is the great year or astrological ages actually useful, or is it too arbitrary-ish? I know what you're saying there, Corrigan.
Well, let me just say that it's not arbitrary at all.
That's where I was going to have the problem with it. Like, it's not arbitrary, but if you mean tactically useful on the scale of a human life.
No.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, but I knew what you were asking.
It's important to know what, it's useful to know what age you're in.
Yeah.
But it changes so slowly, but it's not arbitrary. It's the overlap between the tropical, which is the Sun-Earth relationship, and the Sun-Star relationship.
Yeah,
those are the two layers we talked about earlier. Those are real layers. Their intersection matters, but it's slow.
Greg, you're gonna keep us here forever. Has Austin any familiarity with Chinese astrology? Any overlap with Western stuff? If possible, can you recommend any good sources?
Yes, I have some familiarity with Chinese astrology.
Go for it.
From what I can see, and I haven't specialized in Chinese astrology, there are a variety of subsystems or partial systems which are generally represented as this is Chinese astrology. For example, the Chinese restaurant menu system, you were born in the year of the blank. That is your year pillar in the 4 pillars system. And so the 4 pillars are your hour pillar, your day pillar, your month pillar, and your year pillar. That's basically your rising sign, your moon sign, your sun sign, and your Jupiter sign.
I did not think I'd be interested in this answer because I don't care, but I actually am. That's
well, it's the same sky. You can only, and so they're just we can simplify it down to that. And we can still get some pretty sophisticated stuff and see how you move through time. You should, if you're actually interested in pursuing the overlap with Western stuff, Dr. Jeffrey Kotick is just about to publish his PhD thesis, which what he did was track the movement of Indian and Eastern Mediterranean, written in Greek, astrological texts through China and Japan. And what he found was that there were core astrological texts such as Dorotheus, which is crucial Hellenistic text, that had made it to Japan and been translated by the 9th century. And so, the whole, I don't know, the East does its thing and the West does its thing and never the twain shall meet. We have, we have a slip and slide of cross-pollination. And that's just what he's found already. So there was, for example, Dr. Kotick says that he's found evidence that there was an order of Japanese monks. They were astro monks, and they were literally, they had a synthesis of Chinese lunar mansions, which are different than the other lunar mansions, Chinese lunar mansions and Dorothean Hellenistic astrology, and then these Chinese pieces in the 11th century in Japan. So this has all been a little bit, there's been a little bit more recreation and procreation than anyone thought.
All this stuff that Austin just said, I'm completely unfamiliar with, but one of the reasons we got so close was after he read Starships, because I have I've done a lot of work on looking at how widespread across Eurasia the lunisolar calendar was at a time depth sufficient to influence the Indus River Valley cultures and China and Egypt and Sumer, and it's obviously way down. And so there are 2 things going on there. There is an inheritance of how our relationship to the stars has influenced these different cultures far enough back when it was essentially not the one culture, but going just further up the tree. And then when you look at the differences and similarities across cultures once you hit the historical timeline, what I find so interesting about that is that it speaks to a structural truthness that China and Babylon and wherever independently landed on kind of the same things that sort of worked, and that has emerged from working with the stars. Mm-hmm. So it's, for me, I find this stuff quite enriching to realize that there's some deep structural similarities because of the journey of humans on the planet going back much longer than historical timelines. And then there's a second bit in a historical period where it's well, look at these people independently creating things that have a more than passing similarity to elsewhere, and that speaks to its structural efficacy.
Mm-hmm. Well, and Aaron and I actually had this talk the other day, but with alchemy as the subject. And so there is a certain, we could maybe call it archetypal structure to what a good astrology looks like. There is also a physical structure to what the sky is relative to the earth. Yeah. And so there is a great argument that could be made for completely independent emergence of structurally parallel material. However, we also know that people were talking like crazy.
Exactly. Yeah,
right.
Yeah.
So just because we can make a case for everybody came up with it on their own doesn't mean that everybody came up with it on their own. And if you were like, we're already thinking about it, and some material that somebody else figured out that makes perfect sense because there's that archetypal resonance, you're like, oh yeah, I know what to do with that.
And to unpick that requires multiple PhDs in historiography, because you have the and we cover this a bit in some of the courses in the premium members area, but there's some things happen that were probably necessary in the 20th century but were wrong as to how we think about different cultures interacting with each other, because we came out of the 19th century where you had a very racial hierarchy of like basically only light-skinned people are smart, so they worked things out and it diffused into brown-skinned areas, and then the soul for that was like, you know, it's like a parent separating fighting children, like everyone independently worked, not it was a necessary step.
It was an attempt to truth came from these one people.
Exactly. And so we're now in a very fruitful but beginning days period of going like, well, hopefully none of us are fucking racist, so we can actually work out we can begin to see how cultures are in dialogue and exchange and learning from each other. And the Vedic stuff is a really good example. We spoke about this in Los Angeles last year. There's a lot of stuff in Vedic astrology that smells unbelievably Alexandrian, and if it
and vice versa.
Exactly. But why it's there and robust in a Vedic system is that you didn't have the same multiple collapse problem that happened with the Mediterranean European history in the intervening 2,000 years. So it's retained its operational capacities in a Vedic context, but it some of it just smells like Egyptian temple nonsense, and like
in a good
how way. Exactly. And the trouble with unpicking that is that when you deal historiographically with what stuff came from India and what stuff was imported into India, you hit the whole racist project of empire, because it was ground zero for their skin is too dark to have invented anything. And that is wrong, and rightfully so. You get the overkill response from within India, which is like, no, fuck you, we invented everything. That's also wrong, but it's a kind of wrong I like slightly better, but it's still wrong.
it's an immune system trying to defend against a horrible virus.
Cool question. Thank you for that. Is there a source for Lunar Days? A quick Google search was no help. I use the one that's in the Hygromantia. The origins of the Lunar Days, as far as I can tell, textually is dynastic Egypt, which is literally a list of lucky and unlucky days that are tied to the moon. You will find a bunch of them. I use the Hygromantia one.
Yeah, I think that Lunar Days is something that was probably didn't need to be diffused, because it's literally as simple as counting from the moon's first appearance. Like, okay, well, I can't see the moon today. It's a dark moon. And they're like, oh, saw it again, day 1. Next time you see it, day 2. And then it's just 30. Well, it's 29.5, which will work out functionally to 29 or 30, depending on the month. That's in the Indian material there. Those are called tithis. My guess is that you're going to find a system of lunar days almost anywhere that there's any sky lore still extant.
Sure.
It's like, it's like, oh, did somebody invent the ideas of day and night? Like, it's not very far beyond day and night in terms of like, all you have to do is kind of look up.
Yeah. And we actually get, and this is sort of covered in the Sidereal Magic course, I think, maybe it's the Grimoire course, but the much later concept of waxing and waning, as in do growth stuff during waxing and do destructive or diminishing stuff during waning, is an oversimplification of the lucky and unlucky days, because you actually see growth stuff in the first half, but they're quite specific. And then you see like removal stuff in the second half, broadly speaking, until you get to Dark Moon, where it's like kill people or do nothing.
Right.
And
well, it's become enlightened, kill people.
And so like as far as I can tell, it's a dynastic Egyptian jailbreak or shorthand that sort of emerged from the temples as like, do these things on these days, rather than telling like the villagers and the farmers and the merchants and the sailors and whatever, like the whole cosmology of it. It's like, look, do these things on these days. And so it's this weird shorthand that I think emerged, as far as I can tell, in dynastic Egypt. And the one I use is a hygromantia. You'll find like Agrippa has one. You'll find like there's a bunch of different ones, and they will end on 28, which is the hygromantia, or 29 or 30. Yeah.
So I'm going to go visit the restroom.
Cool.
I've been sitting here for a long time.
Poke Runyon.
And I'm happy to continue sitting here, but I need to.
That's great. Poke Runyon loved to talk about how Franz Bardon died choking on a pork sandwich, although he's unsure as to whether that's true. Not a question.
How I hope to die.
Yeah. I'm going to kill Austin later, so that's not going to happen. All right. If you had to take a wild stab at it, what do you think Gandalf's chart looks like? That's from Cameron. That's an Austin question, and he's in the bathroom. How do you guys feel about Mayan astrology? That's a 60% Austin question. I can answer 40% of it. I'll answer it from a starship's perspective, which is, and I've done a bit of research, quite a bit, frankly, about this this year for a couple of creative projects. The Maya are a people where the system of timing is complete from the earliest extant archaeological records, which means they have it from somewhere. So I look at Maya astrology as a useful, and again, like it's a separate and blah, blah, blah thing, right? But I use it's structurally, it is useful as a comparison for what the lunisolar system of humans being in the universe from a timing perspective looked like maybe 25,000 years ago, because of course, although the colonization of the Americas is much earlier than you were taught in schools, you're going to get people who the Maya are a good example, showing up somewhere, who have brought with them a way of thinking with and being in the world that I can use and hold up against Sumerian and Chinese and Egyptian astrology, and kind of squint down to what our space timing was at a 20,000 year time depth. But if you mean like, the question is, how do you guys feel about Mayan astrology? And I said, I find it very useful as a thing to hold up against in my head, because I'm building that lunisolar 20,000 years ago Laurasian astrological thing. And because they showed up with it fully formed, they came with it. And so they're very valuable to me as a source of comparison. Mm-hmm. They did their own fucking thing with it and got really precise with when worlds were going to end and shit. But like, if you look at it, I kind of keep to like stuff that came out of Alexandria for my magic, just because I resonate with it. It's not a value judgment necessarily, but yeah.
I feel interested, and I think that I don't know enough to have any conclusions. It's math. It's different than I would say it's more different from the Eastern Mediterranean, Indian, and Chinese systems than any of those are from each other.
Yes.
And that I know some things about it, but I don't feel like I understand it at a depth where I can meaningfully compare it yet to the systems that I am more familiar with.
So for me, the bits that appear to be very, very old are the longer cycles we were talking about earlier, because of course you have the long count as the ultimate meta narrative. There's some weird demonic stuff that happened with the Maya where there are, cosmically or metaphorically speaking, pacts that happened, and that's when it gets culturally specific. But what's interesting to me about the Maya is that you have a long count. And the long count maps to the earliest understanding, or the earliest examples of, say, Sumerian creation myths we have. This is all in starships, right? Which is like multi-thousand-year timelines that are in some way processional. And so that is there in Sumer, and that is there with the Maya, and that is implied, at least we find it in the New Kingdom, and thus it has to be an Old Kingdom inheritance, there is which is what we were talking about before. There is a longer timeline story that defines the age, and that as an idea, because we find it in the Maya and Sumer and Egypt. I mean, as far as I'm concerned,
India.
that's a 20,000-year-old idea, right? Yeah, of course, India. Yeah. Is Dark Moon Lilith, this is from Kelsey, is Dark Moon Lilith a functionally useful thing? So weird. Kelsey, are you, like, we had like a crazy Lilith discussion earlier today.
I was waiting to get to this question. So what's very interesting is in Dr. Kotick's research, he found a figure that looks a lot like Lilith. It's this, so there's a figure, there's a god figure for the lunar apogee that's in, like, I don't know, like 9th century translated into Chinese texts. So the lunar apogee is far away as it gets, as far away as the moon gets from the Earth. Perigee is close, right? My brain is no, it's become,
shut the video down.
No, I know, right? Yeah. No, I know, and I'm confusing apogee and perigee. But anyway, so there is a figure in a translated into Chinese text that looks exactly like you would expect Lilith to look, and has the same assignment to the same point in the moon's cycle that 20th century astrologers associated Lilith with, which blew my mind, because I thought that I thought that the 20th century Lilith thing was like a lot of the other 20th century stuff, and that it was aspirational but not quite useful. And so I was shocked to see that at the very least has 1,000+ year precedent, and that Lilith made it to China before 1000 AD is very interesting. The figure is Yui Bei, and she's like this, naked woman with like waist length, wild hair, like holding a severed head in one hand, a knife in the other, and someone's riding a bear, someone's riding a dragon. Like, you're like, okay, like that's not wrong. And so Dr. Kotick basically talks about how that could very well be Persian text that then moved east into China, and that's where some of that material is coming
so
from.
I like, this was all news to me, and I'm glad you went first, because about 10 years ago I read a PhD thesis, and usually I skim PhD theses because, let's be honest, everyone does, which was basically locating the source of Lilith as a Sumerian demon of miscarriage and abortion, like out in the desert, this terrifying thing. And I didn't know the China connection, because I'm going to put this with a long count calendar as an entity that has been harrying mankind for tens of millennia. If Ed Kelsey, like, email me, because I'll send you the PhD. Some Scottish woman, I want to say Hannah something, wrote it. It was amazing. And she basically quite diligently, to my mind, said, ergo, the Lilith we find in the Old Testament is, in fact, this Sumerian abortion and miscarriage demon that would either be propitiated or fucking banished, and terrifying, and like one of those sort of desert entity things. If it's there in China, this is another piece of that. This is a demon from Laurasia rather than one that went up to historical timelines and sideways, is a case I'm going to make. And so that kind of, the astrological component to it is fascinating to me. And I just learned something. Kelsey asked the best questions. She gets them in like seconds before I hit print on the Q&A. But Kelsey asked the best questions.
Well, and so the astrological definition of this point, it's the point where the moon would be furthest from the Earth.
This is like,
right. So if we're talking about relating to the mother principle,
and it's
the anti-mother principle.
And when it's as far away as possible, that's because if you are pregnant, if you are on the way to being a mother, you want this bitch as far from you as possible. There's like a really interesting language to that I just learned something. That was great. Thank you, Kelsey. Are Saturn returns, this is from Maxwell, Saturn returns easier or harder on Capricorns?
They are more significant. And
that's a better way of saying it.
You need more details. Yours, if a planet is if the sun is in Capricorn when someone's born, then it answers to Saturn. And for some charts, so it's more important for all people who are born. The Saturn return is more important for all people born with the sun in Capricorn. It may be excruciatingly worse, or it may be gloriously achievement-receivingly better. But it is more significant in any and all cases. The more planets you have in Saturn-ruled signs, the more significant, again, significant, not better or worse, the Saturn return is.
So another Maxwell one, and you get extra points for mentioning my femstrologer. What would you say to someone who has had mixed results with astrology? And that's where your answer is going to hinge on this definition. My Susan Miller forecasts are always pretty off, and all the YouTube astrologers seem pretty Miss Cleo-esque. I'm like, well, that's an unfair way. Like, I would never describe Chris Brennan as Cleo-esque.
He's become a YouTube astrologer in like the last 3 months.
True.
I don't think he represents the baseline.
That's a good point. Yeah,
which is why it's good that he's doing it.
It irks Austin, and I'm not going to lie. That's one of the reasons I do it. But Susan Miller is this remarkable person to me because she will take a 3-paragraph meander in like a horoscope to complain about her ex-husband or talk about how she fell down some stairs and her friend didn't come and visit her in hospital and now they're not friends anymore. And I just love the unfiltered, and lunacy's unfair because she's a kind of clever, but like I just love that. I love looking at how she sees the world, but a kind of sun sign horoscope for the month is not astrology, right? So when you say if astrology hasn't worked for you, what that means is, and step one, honestly, is like work out what your ascendant is and just start reading that, because Chris will say that
works way better.
Yeah, Chris will say that in all these videos. He's like, this is the November 2018 video for Scorpio ascendant. Like he will not say like Scorpio sun sign, he'll say Scorpio ascendant. And like step one to realizing that, oh, maybe I've been reading the wrong, and dividing the history of the planet or the people on the planet into 12 chunks is only going to get you so far. But if you are going to do that, read your ascendant rather than your actual sun sign.
Yeah. And that takes all of 5 minutes.
Someone says they're dreaming of a podcast wrought with more of Austin's poetry. Does Austin want to use that as an opportunity to make an announcement? That's a smile. Like, Kate, did you write this?
Well, I'm not very poetic in person or in the moment. It takes me a long time to get the poetic structure of things. I have been collecting episodes and interviews with people for something like a podcast. I've got a couple in the bag now. We'll do one while I'm here.
Cool.
They're more just conversations. I don't want to do the interviewer-interviewee dynamic. Not that I think it's inherently flawed. There's just a lot of that. Well, yeah. I really like the conversations I have at 2 a.m. with people, and so I've been trying to structure a few conversations like that, where it's like we're just talking and we're not trying to teach or make everything, go out of our way to make things more approachable than they need to be. And my working title for that is eavesdropping, because that's the idea. It's just, eavesdropping on the conversations I'd have anyway. I've semi-announced that a number of times. I was going to maybe bring it out a month or two ago, but it was the middle of the Venus retrograde and I had a ton of work to do and I didn't want to rush it. Right now I'm thinking that I'm going to put it out right around the Mercury-Jupiter conjunction.
Cool.
In December. That's a good election. I don't feel like I need to wait any longer. But yeah, just a kind of a different angle.
And this is a question for me from Maxwell again. Can you tell me your feelings on substituting holy water for rum in the headless rite? Well, there is neither in the official headless rite. If you mean in the version of it that's in Chaos Protocols, that is like that I kind of devised in conjunction with Jake Stratton Kent. The rum is a specific thing that I promised the four kings that they were amenable to. And so stick with rum. You don't need either if you're just going to open up the PGM and do the headless rite. But for mine, rum. And that's because it's a promise I made to demon kings, and they have more use for rum than they do holy water. James asks, what is the value in understanding Hellenistic astrology as a basis?
Well, historically, the astrology that comes afterward, at least in the Eastern Mediterranean to Caliphate Arabic to medieval and then Renaissance Europe to early modern Europe to now, that line of astrology starts with the Hellenistic era. And so one thing that you will find in every period of development is that astrologers are incredibly conservative, and that they will cite every source they have from the previous era in trying to figure out how something works. And then even when they're saying, and I actually think it works this way, which is different, they will always go back and they will hit every, if you look at astrologer, it's in Renaissance, he went 7 Arabic astrologers' names before he says anything, and they were always looking back. And so if the entire history of astrology, maybe cutting off the 20th century, if they thought it was worth it to look backwards, and we have the ability to look backwards, then that's probably worth it. Now, in the Hellenistic era, they're still looking backwards, but they're looking backwards at legendary founders. They look back to, Hermes, and then Nicepso and Petasiris. And it's said that there's a Nicepso and Petasiris text, but we don't have it. Nicepso and Petasiris, according to the Hellenistic text, were an Egyptian priest, king, Batman and Robin, tag team that wrote the first, the first really good astrology book. But that is, one, obviously at least semi-legendary, and two, we don't even have that semi-legendary. So with 2,000 years of looking back, the earliest that we can look back to is the Hellenistic, which doesn't make it better. It just means that it's worth looking at that.
This is pretty much a precise match to Western magic, and it's something Dr. Stephen Skinner, Professor Ronald Hutton, and everyone else has mentioned. It's like, look, a bunch of rivers flowed into classical Alexandria specifically, but that's essentially ground zero for all the stuff we do from astrology or magic. And so, this is your context. And if you're looking at it, which you should, either as an animist or a postmodernist from a flow model, that's ground zero. Like the more you know about it, it doesn't mean you have to ape it. It is an accumulation of context. The more you know about it, the better literally everything will be. And it's really humbling and wonderful to know that as you are arranging things in your spirit room or your temple space or whatever you want to call it, that this was done 2,100 years ago in a specific city that you can look at or visit, but look at on Google Maps and go, it literally happened there. And there is something so beautiful in the kind of temporal perspective of finding the others, that you situate yourself in that current and in that flow model of history. If there is an era that you want to upskill on, just general history, general magic, general astrology, whatever, it's then, because for whatever reason, fate and so on, that's where it happened.
Yeah Beautiful.
A couple of reincarnation. We're actually going to need to wind up in a minute. And so I'm going to skip. Does astrology make any sense without reincarnation? It does. An Orphic model of reincarnation fits perfectly. But all right. Let me just, because we're going to pick one more, and we got one from Benjamin and one from Andrew and one from Kurt. Oh, maybe two. Should we start with the Kurt one? Is there a talisman that either of you made that went very wrong? For me, that's an easy no. I've made 2 in my life. I've acquired a number more, not that many, but Austin is the one to ask, did this fuck up?
So I'll use this as a teaser for the first episode I recorded of Eavesdropping, which was like a 2.5 hour conversation with my friend and fellow professional Tony Mack, who's made a great number of talismans, and we worked together for almost a decade. And so we actually share a lot of talisman stories. And one thing I required, I was like, before we're going to talk, I need one story of something going miraculously well. I need one story of hilariously wrong, and then one story of just weird. And so that's in there. I will say that I think it was the third talisman I made after I acquired the Gigatrix, did exactly what I wanted it to. It also made homeless people want to fight me, which was not part of the intention.
And was this when you were living in downtown LA?
It was when I was exploring LA, but hadn't moved there yet.
Because that's not a good side effect of talismans.
There was too much Mars and Aries in the brew, and so there were a number of things that did that it was supposed to do, but it would just kind of splash into random hostility from people. So yeah.
I don't have enough experience with talismans specifically. I have, a 10-hour story of any other kind of magic going hilariously and comically wrong. But, that's a Goldie Hawn vehicle that I'm trying to pitch. The last question I want to go with is, and it's a good one to end on. This is from Benjamin. What can the larger astrological magic community do to progress the art experimentally? Benjamin, I'm going to answer first because we're going to end on Austin and he's going to give you a real answer. The astrological magic community is currently a misnomer. It's a few dozen people that we are doing that process of finding the others. It's maybe more than a few dozen, but the point is maybe the larger astrological and the larger magic is exactly why we did so below. But I'm going to hand the rest over to Austin and we'll finish with him.
Yeah, well, I think Gordon has the right idea there in the sense that there has the community as I've known it is I don't know, maybe 10 other people who are on an obscure Facebook forum for the last 10 years, and we've been comparing notes. And so as far as how to progress the art experimentally, you experiment. And then you actually take good notes, you evaluate what that did, what it didn't do, what you thought it would do, et cetera, and you share those stories.
Yeah.
And it's as simple as that. And that's kind of, sharing stories is, 48% of community.
Yeah.
But that's just coming into being. As I mentioned in our H2 for 2018, people just astrological magic just seem to have popped at some point during the first half of 2018, where suddenly it's not just me and a few weird kids in the corner. Suddenly it's something lots of people want to participate in, and that's exciting. And so as people just do work, if people do work and are honest with each other about it, that'll move everything forward.
Yeah. And it's a great question to end on because it kind of goes back to the very beginning where you have to be honest and gentle yet firm with yourself about your results and so on. And you do have to share them. And the other thing, because thank you, Benjamin. This is a really good question to end on because So Below sold out. It was probably 60% astrology, 40% magic. And I got some real good questions from the astrologer people going okay, so I know this is real. Can you give me some backstory text? And I used Dr. Dean Radin's recent book, Real Magic. Is if you are astrologically inclined, read that book so that you are aware that there is some empirical evidence behind the fact that magic works. And I want to widen that out into a macro statement, which is this is an important next thing that happens in the recovery of Western magic from Alfred Whitehead's 3 provincial centuries. And so let's not be dicks to each other about the things we do and don't know. Obviously, I have the various Copics staying with me on the farm, and I will never in my life know as much about astrology as either of them do. And the way that I have those conversations and they communicate with me, so I learn things, is very, very patient, and I can do stuff, maybe not to them, but like I can do stuff in terms of conveying my experience with magic. And as we start talking to each other, because this is happening, let's just not be fucking dicks.
Gordon knows stuff that we don't know.
Sure,
Like,
and I think, and
be
that's
very clear about that.
That's like, but that's like,
I know some magic, but
that's like the critical next step, is that what is happening is a necessary recombination after 1400 years of two things that should not have been split the way they were split. And there is a lot of expertise and experience and passion and so on both sides. And let's just not be fucking dicks to each other is how I'm going to finish that. Let's not be dicks.
Good. And also, if both of these things, one, are actually pieces of a larger thing, then that means that our model of reality needs to be able to account for both.
Yeah.
And so a magical paradigm that doesn't leave room for astrology probably isn't a really a magical enough paradigm.
Yep.
And an astrological paradigm that doesn't really leave room, not just for astrological magic, but for the rest of magic. Just use this astrology, get this, that's efficient parallel worldview.
Yeah.
And that we need something big enough to contain both of those.
Benjamin, thank you for that question, because we're going to hit stop on the video now. And that was a wonderful summation of the project that Austin and Kate and I have been putting together, well, to be honest, over multiple years, but specifically over the last 6 months, of like these guys coming down here and running the event and doing the live video and so on. So I could not have thought of a better way to end it. So thank you, Kate, always behind the scenes controlling lives, for landing it on that last question. And guys, thank you for the amazing questions. This was super fun, and this is going to be the last show for the year. And it's realistically, it's my favorite. Like, it went through a million years, and we spoke some good stuff, and you got to see a little bit of the farm. And yeah, thank you for being here. And thank you for being here.
Oh yeah, thank you everybody.
Right.
That was great.
Hit and stop now, and expect this up in the next, hopefully, couple of hours.